filmed himself walking down a boat ramp in very, very populated crocodile habitat. And he essentially was with his dog, walked into the river, past crocodile warning signs, bloke was telling him not to, filmed himself going into the water, and, a 4-meter crocodile jumped out, bit the guy on the leg, spat him out, grabbed the dog and ate it.
How do you even know that they are looking for someone to be a freelance, looking for a freelance tour guide?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate enough that I've met a lot of people, and networking is the key to getting into any industry. A random moment, eating pizza and looking at castawaries with a French guy named Clement, turned out to be one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had. The job came in, 000 call, lady walking down street screaming. Could be absolutely anything. You're looking at possibly substance abuse, possibly a murder. I mean, ultimate extremes, and there's room for anything that can happen. So I rush out there, lights and sirens get there. This woman's walking down the street screaming, holding a dead cat.
Welcome to Working with Wildlife, where I, your host, Jaden Lunt, speak to experts and enthusiasts in different fields of nature to find out how and why they do what they do. My guest today is a well-known freelance tour guide from far north Queensland with up to 12 years of experience in this industry. He runs up to 21-day tours around Australia. What a time he has. We hear some stories from that and his experiences in the tour guide industry. He's also an experienced wildlife photographer with some work being featured in a wildlife nature book. He's got experience on the police force, and we hear some stories of how he meshed the two words of wildlife and nature and his experience with the police force and what that was like. In this conversation, we cover a range of different topics, but really, we're going to find out some ways about how you might be able to work as a tour guide. So, without further ado, please welcome to the show, Matt Cornish. Thank you for coming on to today's show. I am really looking forward to hearing about your law experience and wildlife, what it looks like through your eyes at the end of this conversation. I'm sure people are going to be much more aware of what's happening in the top end of Queensland. Starting out recently, you've had a pretty cool interaction with your business, and Steve Backshaw, the famed Steve Backshaw, ended up coming along and you got to take him out into the North Queensland bush. Could you tell us a little bit of what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely, Jaden. Thanks for having me. It was a privilege. I guess that's the best way of describing it to start with. Well, first of all, I work as a wildlife or nature tour guide in far north Queensland. I do a lot of freelance work, so I contract myself out to other companies and sort of coordinate myself to travel around Australia with that kind of work. But yeah, recently I had a job from Thankyou Nature Tours, which is an incredible tour company based here in far north Queensland, and they specialise in ethical conservation tours, which we can obviously touch on later. I do a lot of great work with Thankyou Nature Tours, and one of the jobs recently was to take Steve Backshaw out and see if we could find an Australian scrub python in the tropical far north Queensland rainforest, which was an absolute hoot, as you can imagine. Going into that job, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. I mean, it always is when you see someone that in person that you've admired the work that they've done in the conservation world for so long. It was interesting, when you think you're going to take Steve Backshaw out, guide him through the rainforest. I'm thinking, well, who's the guide here to start with? And when we arrived in the rainforest of North Queensland, he just went straight into the bush. And it was hard to keep up with him. He was an absolute beast when it comes to exploration and discovery. And nothing was going to slow him down. Not wait a while, not stinging tree. He was just powering straight through all of it. But yeah, fantastic guy, incredibly motivated, very, very knowledgeable. And we spent about 4 hours in the rainforest one evening, and I can tell you right now, at 9 o'clock at night, it was 30 degrees Celsius. It was about 1,000% humid. So
really,
we were sweating liters, and it was a tough night. The conditions were favourable, but there wasn't too much action. And on our way back out of the rainforest, actually, towards the vehicles, we came across an Australian scrub python, probably about 2.5 meters long, that had fallen out of a tree over the footpath with a bat in its mouth, a spectacled flying fox. And this snake was mid-consumption, the bat hanging out of its mouth. So as you can imagine, for a show like Deadly 60
when you came across it.
Yeah, well, you can only imagine the film crew were just like, yes, this is what it's all about. So, yeah, we got down and we filmed this animal. A show called Deadly
Yeah.
60. You've got Australia's largest snake consuming a bat. It was pretty
Mm.
good quality footage. So, yeah, Steve was ecstatic. I was
It's
stoked and
just
relieved.
camera. Yeah, yeah. Action.
It's the stuff you can't make up. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
was a pretty special moment.
Wow, and you mentioned also there was a camera crew there. So is this going to be like a part of a feature film that you're also going to be starring in, Matt?
Yeah, most certainly. So this was part of the episodes of Deadly 60. Steve is obviously the main character. I was just there to help him out and see if we could find some creatures. But you never know. I might be sneaking around
Yeah.
here or lurking around in the background of one of his episodes in the future. Who knows?
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. All right. Well, I'm sure if does come out and you see yourself, we'll be able to see that on your page potentially. Bit of a sneaky screenshot of Matt starring in the background. And you said also, we might be even touching it now, ethical tour guiding. What is ethical tour guiding in comparison to non-ethical tour guiding?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a lot of businesses out there that work in the tourism space, and some of them orientate themselves towards nature. So it might be undertaking walks in national parks, exploring the natural world. But I have seen over my years there's a lot of tour companies that specialize in selling seats and putting a lot of focus on the marketing component rather than delivering a high quality product. Pushing through clients, making money, and ensuring that the business is successful financially. And then there's small operators, small companies, and I've already highlighted one being Thankyou Nature Tours. That is a small family-owned business that doesn't necessarily concentrate its efforts on profits or the financial side of the business, but providing high quality inter and turning the experience into an educational experience where people can really connect with nature. They can learn about nature and learn about some of the species that they encounter, and therefore they have a greater appreciation for the natural world after that experience. And I think encompassing a lot of the ethical side of wildlife interactions is truly important as well. Making sure that we maintain a safe distance from animals and we're
Yep.
respectful of these creatures when they're going about their daily lives. Obviously, there's tour operators out there, although illegal, will pick up animals and will disrupt these animals during the course of their lives. Some small businesses like FNQ Nature Tours focuses truly on the ethical side and puts the wildlife first instead of the clients, which I think is tremendously important when we are entering their world.
Would you say that's somewhat similar to a nature reserve where people are in the cage and they enter the animal's environment in comparison to a zoo where the animals are in the cage and they're in our environment? Is that a similar comparison, you would say?
Well, we're still looking at full wildlife. We're looking at wild areas and wildlife. The Daintree rainforest, the Atherton tablelands, beautiful, pristine environments. So there's absolutely no form of captivity, but most certainly the approach to the interactions with the wildlife. These animals are not there for your entertainment. It's a privilege for us to be able to experience them going about their daily lives. So, we're watching a cassowary feeding right in front of us. Let's make sure that we move out of the way to ensure that cassowary has free passage. We are here as a spectator. We're not a participant.
And would you say this has been a recent, in the past decade or 5 years, that this ethical approach to tour guides and nature interaction has taken off, or has it been a gradual thing from, say, early 2000s, would you say?
Well, I think there's been a lot more awareness about ethical interactions with wildlife and the impact that people can have on an environment. I think that's been changing over probably the last 20 years, more aggressively in the last 10 years. And we can also see it in captive animals. We
Okay.
talked about zoos just briefly then. Zoos have a responsibility. They are not a theme park. They have a responsibility to the animals, and they need to make sure that they represent these animals as best as possible. And sometimes that means focusing on the conservation efforts of this species in the wild and making sure that we educate people accordingly. To give you an example, the Australian Reptile Park down in New South Wales, I'm a huge advocate for that zoo, and they focus a lot of effort on not only good quality education, but also focusing on conservation and making sure these animals are being looked after in the wild. and obviously the animal that is on display is representing the greater species.
Right. And I haven't yet been to the Australian Reptile Park, but throughout my years, I've heard a lot about these guys, and so they also have a fairly, correct me if I'm wrong, a fairly large research facility as well. Do they do venom studies down there?
Oh, they do a lot of great work. I mean, first of all, they've got part of the Australian Reptile Park organisation is a non-for-profit organisation called Aussie Arc, and this was established as an insurance population for Tasmanian devils when it was believed that the devil facial tumour disease was going to annihilate wild devils. So they created an insurance population inland New South Wales up at Barrington Tops, and that essentially grew into creating an insurance population for many different animals Australia-wide that were under threat. They created this artificial but huge alpine property where these animals could live in a semi-wild environment and make sure that they continue to genetically diversify these creatures and also ensure that they are ready to be released into the wild. But the Australian Reptile Park, on their property on the central coast of New South Wales, they do have a venom milking facility whereby they milk terrestrial snakes and they turn that venom into anti-venom. So they provide the venom to the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory to then turn it into anti-venom. They're the sole provider of terrestrial snake venom in Australia. So any person that receives anti-venom from, obviously...
Sole provider.
It's sole provider. It's come from the Australian Reptile Park, and it's thanks to the great team down there that do that work. And so a zoo not only has the responsibility of educating, but also providing research and safety mechanisms, which is obviously what the Australian Reptile Park's been doing.
Yeah, right. Well, talking about zoos as well, Matt, you yourself used to be an ex-zookeeper, if I'm not mistaken. What have you done wildlife-wise as a form of work or even volunteering?
Well, I've worked with wildlife most of my life, all of my adult life, certainly. At the age of 15, when I was at school, I grew up on the central coast of New South Wales near the Australian Reptile Park. And I actually went off and did work experience there when I was in year 10 and 11. And then eventually I went into volunteering there on my days off after school. And then I ended up moving into studying captive animal care at a local TAFE in New South Wales and volunteering a couple of days a week at the reptile park to learn my trade. From there, when I turned 19, I moved up to far north Queensland, which is where I live now. And I actually obtained a job at a zoo up here near Cairns as a venomous snake keeper. And that facility was very populous with crocodiles. So as a sort of a flow-on effect, I ended up moving into learning about crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, freshwater crocodiles, a lot about their ecology behaviour. And that obviously deeply fascinated me. From there, I moved from zookeeping into wildlife education. I started working with my now wife, where we travelled around teaching kids all over North Queensland about the importance of wildlife, from early education all the way up to presenting at universities about crocodile ecology. Over those years, I then moved into a few other fields that weren't animal related necessarily, but found myself working as a tour guide about 6 years ago now. And I'm now a full-time tour guide and expedition leader and nature photographer. So I work solely with wildlife, which has been really enjoyable.
Yeah, you said that you're also a freelance tour guide. So if you could you explain that a little bit to us? You can work as a tour guide. Underneath someone, you can have your own business and you work for yourself, but then there's also freelance tour guiding. How does that work out? How do you become a freelance tour guide?
It's an interesting one. Obviously this is the Working with Wildlife podcast, and a lot of people out there are probably learning how they can, find their little niche in the world. I started off working for a company as a tour guide and fell in love with it pretty quickly. And then I started my own business as a sole trader, which is obviously myself as a tour guide. I've decided not to start my own company. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, and one of my dear friends owns a tour operating company in far north Queensland. So I know how much effort goes behind the scenes and all the stress involved. And I said, look, I don't want that. I just want to be in the field as much as I can. So I decided to contract myself out for other companies. around far north Queensland. And
Mm.
also one of my big jobs, my main client is an American-based company where I'm able to travel around Australia conducting conservation and photography-focused tours for American clients. So yeah, being a freelance guide, I can pick and choose what work I want to
Okay.
do, pick and choose when I work, and also align myself with companies that really work within my morals and values of what wildlife tourism is all about.
Yeah, when you say pick and choose when you want to work, it reminds me of the food service delivery service Didi, where their famous slogan seems to be "Choose your own hours, work when you want to work," which is it's like it's not related, but it is. You said what's a little maybe go down that a little bit deeper. How does that actually work out? So you freelance yourself. How do you make contact with a company that how do you even know that they are looking for someone
Mm.
to be a freelance or looking for a freelance tour guide?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate enough that I've met a lot of people, and networking is the key to getting into any industry. For me to start off as a tour guide is an
Okay.
interesting story in itself, and uh, James Botcher, who is the owner and operator of Thankyou Nature Tours, he would absolutely love me to gloat this story on the podcast. So I'm absolutely going to go there. Um, I actually entered a photography competition. I think it was in 2018 or 2000. No, I think it was 2018, and it was a wildlife or nature competition hosted by the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area board. And I entered a cassowary image, and it's an image of a cassowary walking down a beach with the beautiful ocean as the background. And I actually was fortunate enough to win. And they had a little presentation, so I went there, and they called out who the first place is, and the fellow that came second was James from FNQ Nature Tours, and this was an opportunity for me to meet him and just get talking. And next thing within a blink of an eye, I'm now working for him. So I was working for him casually outside of another job that I had. And from there, I moved into almost full time work with him. He has some amazing contracts with Australian Geographic. So I started operating tours for Australian Geographic, doing bird watching tours,
Okay.
photography tours. And then
Wow.
from there, I ended up meeting some staff from Natural Habitat Adventures that were also contracting FNQ Nature Tours. And I was able to make relationships there. So networking is the key. If you meet someone that's interesting, get to know them, maintain those relationships, because you never know what it could turn into. And when an opportunity knocks, grab it with both hands and have a crack. Generally speaking, there's nothing to lose in it.
Just go for it. Yeah. Wow. That's So have you only entered one photo competition? Have you? Is this the first one that you? Was that the first one that you won, came first place in, and is this something that you commonly do? I mean, you said you're a photographer, you love it. Do you often enter your pictures into these kinds of gigs?
So I'm a self-taught photographer. I've been doing it for over 10 years. It was just for fun. I really enjoyed capturing a moment in an animal's life and showcasing that image to a greater audience. And that's sort of why I started
Mm.
doing it. That was actually the first competition I have ever entered for an animal image, and I won it. It should have been the only competition I ever entered, 100% success rate. But no, I have entered a few competitions since then. Most notably is an amazing competition run by an organisation called Rainforest Rescue, which are they do a lot of work in preserving rainforests, particularly around the Daintree area. They actually buy properties, rehabilitate it into
Mm-hmm.
rainforest, and return it back to its natural state, so to speak. And they run, photography competitions. You pay a price, you enter, all that money goes into buying more properties. So they're the kind of competitions I like to enter. Not so much
Right.
to make money or to win prizes. It's more so as a charitable donation. But yeah, I won People's Choice Award for the Rainforest Rescue competition 1 year for a leaf-tailed gecko image, and I've had a couple of tree kangaroo images that were runners up.
Ooh.
But other than that, it's not something that I dive into too deeply. But if the competition is related generally to a charitable income, then by all means I'll throw my 2 cents and a photo in.
You said tree kangaroos there, Matt, as well. I was listening to an episode on your podcast, and your wife mentioned somewhat emphatically that people, excuse me, even Australians don't know that we have kangaroos not just on the ground, but also in the trees. Can you explain a little bit of a profile image on what this tree-loving kangaroo is?
Yeah, most certainly. We have tree kangaroo species in Australia and Papua New Guinea. In Australia, we have two different species. They're both found in the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, so far north Queensland. One of them is called the Bennett's tree kangaroo, lives in the Daintree National Park and the mountainous surrounds. Incredibly elusive animal. But in the Atherton Tablelands, which is inland of Cairns, looking around about 750 to 1,000 metres above sea level, we have the Lumholtz tree kangaroo that resides in the rainforest. A lot easier to see, still quite elusive at times, but this is a very, very unique creature. And as you alluded to, most Australians wouldn't have a clue about it. I actually did a video of a tour group that I was working with, and I filmed all the people with their cameras pointed at this tree. And then I zoomed in, and there's a tree kangaroo sitting in the tree.
Yes.
And I put that on social media, and it got over 1 million
outside
views.
Someone's house as well.
Yeah. It's bordering on a revegetated conservation property, which is a really, really great work done by the local community there. But I live in a rainforest area, and I have tree kangaroos in my yard as well at times. And on this video, are people saying kangaroos don't live in trees? Tree kangaroos don't exist. This isn't a tree kangaroo. You've just made this up. This is AI. So yeah, I've had hundreds of comments of people telling me that tree kangaroos are just made up, and this is some big possum-looking thing. So yes,
that's it.
A lot of Australians have absolutely no idea. Honestly, a lot of people internationally think Australia is just a big desert.
AI even.
Yeah, and then a lot of people in Australia.
Or that we don't exist.
Yeah, this is true as well. But yeah, a lot of Australians have no idea about a lot of creatures that live in far north Queensland, including the tree kangaroo.
Wow. So tree kangaroos, a very unexpected animal. What is there any other animals that you have that have up in the Daintree, up in the north, far north Queensland, that people don't know about? Is there another particular animal that stands out?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind when you ask me that question is the Atherton Tablelands has the highest diversity of possum species out of anywhere in Australia. We have a lot of endemic possum species that are only found up here, and a lot of these species are only found at very, very high altitude, so they like that cooler conditions. The Lemuroid possum, the Herbert River ringtail possum, the green ringtail possum. A lot of people have never heard of these animals, and they are strictly found in far north Queensland rainforests. In Queensland, we have our national parks logo, which is a possum. A lot of people don't understand that that's actually a Herbert River ringtail, which is only found in the wet tropics rainforest. And if you could dive into an even more controversial conversation, it would be climate change and what kind of an impact it's going to have on these animals. As the temperatures increase, generally speaking, these animals will have to increase in elevation. But it's a mountain. It doesn't go forever. There will be a point that these animals will either have to physiologically adapt or they're going to run out of habitat. So, yeah, there's a lot of animals up here that are potentially facing threats either from domestic clearing or from potential climate change as well. But yeah, there's a lot of animals found up here that people have no idea about. The chameleon gecko is another one. It's a gecko probably about, I'd say, 15 centimeters. Sits on a little branch facing down in ambush position, just waiting for insects to walk past. Beautiful animal. I've never seen it, but if the tail of a chameleon gecko falls off, it actually squeals. So it makes a sound, which is pretty mind-boggling. It's obviously a defense adaptation. Yeah.
Matt, is that AI or is that real?
Well, I haven't seen it, so it must be AI.
Must be. Is it? Sure, I might have to look up some videos afterwards to see if there's some videos of that, because screaming tail. That's just add that to the list of things in Australia to freak out everyone who wants to come over. We're a desert. So far, we found out that we're a desert. We've got kangaroos not just on the ground but in the trees, and we also got animals that have screaming tails.
Yeah, so pretty much.
That's a crack up. You also you're on this podcast, Matt, but you also co-host a podcast with your wife. Could you tell us a little bit about the backstory of that and why and the content that you talk about on the podcast?
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, I must attribute that to my wife, my amazing wife, Jodie. She is the heart and soul of wildlife education here in far north Queensland. She's a great ambassador for not only the local species but Australia wide. She's run a business called Thankyou, so she's a wildlife education business. Run it for 17 odd years,
Mm.
but she's moved more into the online space now. During
Wow.
COVID, we obviously couldn't deliver educational content in schools. And we wanted to continue to do that. And, all these kids were stuck at home. They didn't have their regular lessons. They didn't have the interaction with the outdoors. And we decided at that time to be able to do Skypes with experts in a particular field and live stream them onto Facebook so kids could log in through their parents and watch these videos and learn about the natural world while they're stuck inside. So we did that, and our first person we had was Jamie Seymour, which is the world leading expert on jellyfish, and it's just an amazing
Wow.
conversation. We recorded it, obviously, and
Mm.
Jody decided, well, how about we save these recordings and turn them into audio files and make a podcast out of it?
All
So
right.
we have
That's
a
good.
sister business from Zoo to You called Australian Wildlife Education, where we deliver online wildlife education content. And the podcast is a channel of that. It's called Wild Chats. And we have over 50 episodes now where we speak
Mm.
to people who are experts in the field, but also some interesting characters as well along the way. But it turned from educating kids at home into probably something that we enjoyed more. Jody hosts probably 80% of them. I jump in where I can, but we learn so much from these experts. And
Mm.
as a tour guide, it's great for me to obtain this knowledge that I can pass on to people who are traveling Australia and give them first-hand information from an
Yeah.
expert. So it's been really handy for us to learn a lot. And as it turns out, a lot of people have enjoyed it. Most notably, we received an email from a truck driver who drives interstate almost every day from Queensland to New South Wales. And he said he absolutely loves, he knows nothing about nature. He didn't even know tree kangaroos existed, as per most Australians. But he just loved learning something new and different to what his normal lifestyle is all about. And, he ends up making donations towards these conservation organisations and speaking to his friends and family about these initiatives. So what's turned from a little
Wow.
passion project is turned into a nice little beast where we're able to tell people stories and pass it to, onto members of public that may have originally no interest in it or no understanding in it. And it's been brilliant.
So that's cool. That's a good story to show that even if people don't necessarily know lots about wildlife, doesn't mean they don't care. They just need to be given an opportunity to care, maybe, or an opportunity to learn more about it and shown the value in that. And would that be? Would you say that's a bit of like the fire that kind of um, cooks the food for you? Is that your want to teach people about wildlife that maybe don't know much about wildlife? What's kind of the driving force behind what you do, Matt?
So for me, my wife, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I was a police officer for 7 years in far north Queensland. And during that time, it wasn't easy.
Mm.
And my wife regularly said to me, if money wasn't an issue, what would you do for work? And I said, honestly, I would travel Australia and just photograph wildlife. That's what I would do. And she said, well, go do it. And that was sort of the fuel for me, the rocket fuel of knowing that I can achieve what I want to achieve.
What a
And
supporter.
the only limits and boundaries are, within your own mindset. You can achieve what you want to achieve, and you just need to focus and put the effort in. And I guess I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here, but the rocket fuel for me is being able to showcase the natural world to people who have not seen it before or want a greater and deeper appreciation for it. The main work that I do is for Natural
Mm.
Habitat Adventures, which is that American-based company. We're the travel partner for the World Wildlife
Yes.
Fund. So with that, we have a great responsibility to ethically showcase the natural world to really high-end, deeply fascinated and deeply educated people, and show them what the natural world is all about,
Yes.
and really relate them to the deeper connectivity of
And
it.
what's going on?
And for me, seeing people's face is my fuel. I know that sounds weird, just if that's one sentence, but when someone sees a koala for the first time,
It would be, but
I had a client once that said, I spoke to someone and said, "Why are you in Australia? Why are you here?" And she said to me, "When I was a little girl, I did a project on Australian animals, and my teacher focused my attention on platypus. And she wanted me to do a talk to the class on platypus. She was 7, 8 years old, and she did. And she said I was always interested in platypus, and she was like 65 now, and she said now I finally get to see a platypus.
Wow.
And when she saw that platypus, I didn't care about the platypus. I was just watching her face and her reaction. And when we got her onto one to look at it, it was just the
Oh,
tears were flowing. And I'm not just talking about her. I mean, it was just such an emotive experience to see someone have that real deep connection with nature, And I've had the same experience with a koala. A lady who was 70 when she was a little girl had a toy koala, and when she grew up, she wanted to see a real one. And to see that connection is rocket fuel, not only for me but for most tour guides. To see the admiration and the energy just connecting with nature it is rocket fuel 2.0. It just, man, it gets you going. It gets you going.
wow. It's the next level. Yeah. Would you say then, like, it kind of makes the challenges of running a business or an organization and the effort you took to create that tour and then seeing that as an outcome is like the cherry on top? It's the flower that opens up at the end is one of the big things for you.
Well, again, I am very fortunate in the fact that being a freelance guide, I do all the boots on the ground kind of work. I don't necessarily do too much work behind the scenes for tours. So I essentially receive the job, the guests, and
Yes.
away I go. And I essentially am the connection between the natural world and the clients.
Right. Okay.
So, but in saying that, I run 21-day tours around Australia. They are hard work. You average probably
Whoa.
5 to 6 hours of sleep per night. And you're doing upwards of 30,000 steps a day. It is exhausting. It is tiring. But to see those results and that connection between the clients and the natural world is just everything just is so worth it. It's amazing.
Wow. I think two things. I think the amount of fitness and effort that you go through, does that mean we're going to see you on the next Australian Ninja Warrior? And two, does I think I missed a little bit of the what you meant with the freelance aspect of tour guiding is that because you've made the connections and you said that the connections are key, and so because you've been able to network so well, they then reach out to you, and so there's not much of a reaching out to other people to get work as a freelancer. They already have you in the books, and they just say, "Hey, we need you. Go do that." That's more so what you meant by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started off freelance guiding, I was probably hustling a little bit more, looking for work and contacting companies. But now, as an established guide, I'm able to just receive the jobs to me, and then I'll schedule them in based on the timings and the priorities and what I want to do for that year. So generally, I'll organise my big trips for Australia, my 2 to 3 week tours, and then I'll work my way down in size of those tours. And first thing I do is, at my wife's request, I book into school holidays because she's a teacher, so her time off is school holidays. So I book in my time off as the school holidays, and then I fill the gaps in around that. And I always say I want to have as much time off as I can, but I end up taking so much work. It's very busy. Last year, I calculate I slept in a hotel room 250 nights of the year. So it was a very, very busy year, but that's the kind of lifestyle that I live.
Wow. And with living that wild kind of life that I think other people would want to do, what are some top three learning curves that you've come across along your journey in becoming a tour guide?
Top 3 learning curves. That's a big one. I think read, and read would be one of the keys. Read deeply fascinating books.
Cheat code is just use all three.
And well, and I'll get there. That's just one. I'm not going to get out of it that easily. But I think reading is just so incredibly important. And pick up books that you're not really comfortable with, I think is really important as well. For me, I wasn't a
Mm.
huge reader. I liked learning other ways, from meeting people and whatnot. But I tried to dive into books that I probably wasn't too interested in, and gain an appreciation for the broader knowledge space. And it gave me a little bit more, earthly knowledge, so to speak, a bit of a broad spectrum of knowledge. And I think if people can dive into books, pick up something that's a little bit out of their comfort zone, you'd be surprised what kind of material you can experience. And I think that's really the key for broadening anyone's knowledge space, is just pick up a book, not a Kindle, a book, a hard book with smelly pages, and
Mm.
just dive into it and spend every minute you can just reading. Uh, Tip
Okay,
number
so
two,
that'd be one.
learning
Yes, tip
curve.
two. Yeah,
Always travel
that's a
with
great one. Reading is super important. I think.
yeah, yeah. The second one I would say for a crazy lifestyle is always travel with plenty of laundry detergent, and you get very creative when it comes to doing your clothes washing. As I've mentioned, traveling all over the place, 3 weeks at a time, sleeping in hotel rooms more than my own bed. You get pretty good at
Mm.
maintaining a compact life in a bag. My whole life can be fit into a bag. It's pretty crazy, but make sure you've got plenty of laundry detergent. Would be my
Right. I
my
think your house is
my
testament to
second
that.
tip. Yeah, yeah, that's right. I live in a tiny home, so my whole life is in a tiny home. I carry everything in one bag. But
Yeah.
yes, plenty of laundry detergent would be one of them. And
Okay.
a little travel
On
hack.
laundry detergent,
Mm.
have you? Oh, travel. Tell me the travel hack. After I just have you ever used the natural soap that you can create? I think it's from a species of tea tree. Have you ever used that, or had to use that, or chosen to use that because you had no detergent?
I don't know the one you're talking about, but I don't know the product that I do use, but it is a natural detergent. Everything we use, because we live in a rainforest and a tiny
Yeah.
home, we need to be mindful about the harsh chemicals that we do use. So everything is completely natural in our existence. So
Mm.
my wife always makes sure that she's putting me onto the best products available. So yeah, I've always got like a kilo of laundry detergent that travels everywhere with me. And you know, there's a reason I say that is you never know where you're going to end up and how long you're going to be there for. A prime example is
Mm.
I was doing a tour last year, 2023, through southern Australia, Kangaroo Island, Great Ocean Road, Tasmania. When I got to Tasmania, I was flying from Hobart home
Mm.
to far north Queensland, but there was a cyclone called Cyclone Jasper, mass flooding. The airport in Cairns is underwater, and there's airplanes
Oh,
floating.
Jasper.
So it's like, right, I can't get home for another week and a half. So it's like you've just got to
Was there
roll with the
actual
punches.
planes were actually floating?
Yeah,
Planes turned into boats.
there is a legitimate photo of Cairns Airport with a plane floating in floodwater. It was mind-boggling. I mean, you're looking at record-breaking floods of 2 meters of rainfall in 3 days.
Wow.
So that was pretty wild. So I couldn't get home. You
That's
end up.
amazing. I think they should use that as like a an ad for how buoyant their planes are, and if you take that airline overseas, you will be safe. I think that could be turned into a positive.
The landing process might be a little bit challenging, but they're minor details, I guess. My
Yes,
my
yes,
travel hack, actually, when it comes to staying in hotel rooms, and I have been
yes.
caught out by this before. Uh, when I guide, if I have a co-guide that's a male, generally we travel and share rooms, and so you get to know these guys pretty well. And some of these fellas have traveled around the world for 10 years
Yeah.
guiding nonstop. One of the best hacks was always
Well,
unplug the alarm clock. I mean, it sounds simple, but hotel rooms have got alarm clocks. There's a lot of people out there that might have stayed there the night before and may have had an early flight, or they're just a pain. And they might set the alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning. And if you don't unplug that alarm clock, you
no.
might be waking at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I've had plenty of experiences. I think there's at least 3 where the alarm clock's gone off somewhere between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. And it hasn't been great. So I would always suggest to people, unplug the alarm clock.
That's Wow. Okay, that's like an extra. That's like a 2.4 learning curve, a
Yeah,
2.5 learning curve. It's an additional one.
yeah.
And now, what would you say as a third and final learning curve that you've faced, that you've had to really kind of uh, adjust some things?
Mm. For me, I think the tourism industry is incredibly fragile. People that want to work with wildlife, whether it be in a zoo
Fragile.
or as a or as a tour guide, or in any form of tourism industry involving wildlife, it's a very fragile industry. And we saw it, more so during COVID. Every single tourism industry is completely finished immediately, and everyone loses their job. So financially, it's most certainly not the most stable
Mm.
job ever, but I find it to be one of the most rewarding experiences. Being a zookeeper was tough. The wage is very, very low. I would even say it's disgustingly low in a lot of zoos. And I think a lot of these companies, they
Okay.
take advantage of young people that want to work with wildlife. And they always have the mindset that if you're not happy,
Yeah.
leave. We've always got someone else that wants your job. And that is very, very difficult. But I
Yeah.
think if I could pass on any knowledge to anyone, it would be know your value and back yourself. If you
Yeah.
unhappy in a job and you feel
Good.
like you're being undervalued, then respect yourself more than anyone else, and go and look for another opportunity. I think that's really important. You can make good money working in the tourism wildlife industry. You have to work hard to make great connections, and it is a fragile economy when it comes to that. But I think you can make good money, but you just need
Mm.
to respect yourself and know your own value. I think that's probably the best tip I can give anyone.
Yeah. Okay. Those are some really good tips, actually, as well. That's the best one is a big one is knowing your value. Because if I guess if you don't know your value, then you don't know what to expect others to treat you,
Mm.
or how far you should be going, or what you could be doing, or your boundaries are then also affected. And if you don't have good boundaries, then people are going to walk over you. And with the point of you feel, you use the word even disgusting to describe how some zoo industry zoos within the zoo industry kind of use young people because of their enthusiasm and want to get into the wildlife field, and they're so passionate, and so they kind of use that. Do you think that there's change on the horizon with that, or this is going to be something that is going to be sticking around for a while still?
Yeah, look, it's a catch-22, and firstly, I'll start off by saying not all zoos are like this. There's some amazing zoos out there that look after their staff, and
No.
when you see the staff that do work at these zoos, you can understand why they've stayed there, and they respect them and they look after them. Um, you know, you can't. And going back to the value thing, you can't expect other people to respect you if you don't respect yourself, and I think that's really important. When it comes to change, look, I think it's part and parcel of the journey. If you start working at a zoo for minimal money, and I was full time at a crocodile park up here on $15 an hour, it's unsustainable. I
Mm.
was um, I was having a look at the roster and seeing when the cleaner had days off, and I said, "Hey, can I please get a couple hours overtime? I'll clean the toilets so I can make a couple more dollars onto my paycheck." So what I did was I would come in early when the cleaner wasn't working and clean the toilets, the public toilets, so I could earn a couple of dollars more. And I'm talking only an extra $50 in my pay every week. So that's the kind of things that you put in. But
Mm.
in doing that, you're working hard and you're appreciating what hard work can get you. And it's all part of that journey. I volunteered for a couple of
Yeah.
years as well in a zoo, even if it was just moving rocks and mulch. It shows that you've got a good work ethic, but it also allows you to learn your trade, and
Yeah.
learn what you want to do with life when money's not, essentially at the forefront of your mind. So I think it is an important process for people to go through if they
Yeah.
want to go far in the industry. But I also think it's very, very poor form on behalf of a lot of these captive, wildlife businesses that do this.
I would agree with the tips that you've suggested. With it builds your work ethic, and at least you're getting the experience. And no, not all zoos are terrible. I know personally that of some really good ones, but there is still the risk there outside of those zoos that people can run into, particularly from what I've heard in less less financially stable countries, or well-off countries often can have that problem more so than such as countries like Australia. Um, Now, I guess talking about the unfortunate side of making money, and maybe we could use that as a very rough jump into your experience as a police officer. You said that was for 7 years you were a police officer, Matt, and you have had a lot of experience mixing those two worlds over that period of time. How have you always wanted to be in the police force, or was that something that you kind of fell into?
Yeah, well, a lot of people that do join the police, they tell stories about, oh, I used to dress up as a police officer when I was a little kid, and I've always wanted to do this, and I want to do what's right by the community and all these things. Absolutely not the case for me. For me, I went from feeding crocodiles for 1,000 people watching a show, and handling inland taipans and doing venomous snake demonstrations to joining the police. There is absolutely no denying it. I did it purely out of financial reasons. I went from zookeeping into wildlife education, doing a little bit of work here and there, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough money to be able to travel. I wanted to be able to travel the world. So I joined the police because you could earn good money whilst also having, mid-20-year-old male. He wants a sense of adventure. So I want to have a job that I found to be exciting and adrenaline rushing, as much as feeding crocodiles, but also make good money. So I joined the police in 2015 at the start of the year. Did 7 years. So I did 4 years working in general duties in Cairns. So that's like working on the beat, responding to 000 calls, could be anything. Transferred up to Port Douglas, just north of Cairns, and did the same thing there. And then the last year of my job, which was in 2021, I actually worked as the media officer for Far North Queensland. So essentially, I did all the news interviews and did all the newspaper articles and all that kind of stuff, and created the social media presence that the police needed. I did that so I could create a Monday to Friday job, because I had never in my life had a Monday to Friday job, and I thought, this is, if you've made it, if you got a Monday to Friday job. So I applied for that job, did it for a year, and then at the same time I was tour guiding on my days off. So it didn't matter what I was doing Monday to Friday, I was still working on the weekends anyway. So it was a bit of a catch-22. But then, eventually I decided to make the decision to move into full-time guiding. Look, I learned a lot policing. I certainly set myself up for a lot of life experience, and I like to think I've got a pretty well-rounded, educated view of society and how different political decisions are made and different governmental platforms exist. Yeah. So I've worked all over Cape York. If anyone is familiar,
really helped with that.
Yeah, if anyone's familiar with Far North Queensland, I've worked in Arakoon, Pomperia, Kowanyama, Lockhart River. These are Indigenous communities in Far North Queensland, generally riddled with social issues. So working in these areas, I learned the most important use of force option a police officer has is his tongue. The ability to communicate with people was tremendously important, and I think I really took out a lot of life experience, and it assisted me moving forward in tour guiding. Leading tours around Australia, having a law enforcement background is pretty handy. I'm able to communicate at different levels and make things happen if I need to.
Previously, we touched that you work in a bit of a wildlife space. If there's two things. First, I'll go to, you mentioned you moved up to Port Douglas. Curious, when was that you moved to Port Douglas?
So I didn't move my house. So I still lived in Cairns, but I was working in Port Douglas in 2019 and 2020.
Because it was I've had an experience with the Port Douglas Police, and I think it might have been just before you got there. It just been a very funny if it went through your hands. But I lost my wallet up in Port Douglas back in 2018, maybe early 2019, but I think it was late 2018, and I had no idea where it went. I had a $50 note in that wallet, plus everything else. And I went home, and then I think it was about a month or 2 months later, I received my wallet back in the mail. They had sent it back in the mail. Someone had brought it in, but there was a good deed fee, and that good deed fee was that $50 that was in my wallet. But I did get it back, and everything else apart from that, all the cards and everything. So that was great. So that's my experience with the Port Douglas Police. But your experiences with is there any stories that you can tell us of kind of the darker side of wildlife interactions with legally and the wildlife trade? Did you have much experience in that space that you can speak on?
Yeah, certainly. When it comes to wildlife, they say it's the third biggest smuggled item worldwide behind drugs and firearms. Whether it be live animals for the pet trade or it be parts of the animal for a collector piece, both equally as disgusting. Live animal exporting and smuggling. I'd say 90% of these animals don't arrive at their destination alive. It's just mass slaughtering of native animals in the hope of making a couple of dollars. It's disgusting.
Wow.
But with my experience, everyone knew I worked with wildlife or the police. So generally my experience was receiving phone calls from other police when they've encountered something. I've got a few wildlife stories from the police, but when it comes to criminal behaviour, coordinating effort and providing legislative support to other officers, letting them know that, hey, this is illegal. These are the offences that have been committed. This is what we need to do. Did a lot of intelligence gathering as well for the federal police and just assisted police in different matters they came across. Sometimes officers might execute a search warrant on a house and there might be snakes there and they send pictures off me to identify it. And then, I request a license, make sure it's all matched up and things like that. Sometimes some of those animals are exotic, so not even meant to be found in Australia at all. And then I support those officers in what the offences are and how they can commence proceedings against them.
And what would be a couple of the strangest experiences that you've had with wildlife, whether that be with Australian wildlife or exotics or things that you have found that you didn't expect to see?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. I had a story in Cairns where the job came in, 000 call, lady walking down street screaming. Could be absolutely anything. You're looking at possibly substance abuse, possibly a murder. I mean, ultimate extremes, and there's room for anything that can happen. So I rush out there, lights and sirens get there. This woman's walking down the street screaming, holding a dead cat. I thought, what is going on? And she said, it's inside. Okay. Got my hand on my gun. I'm thinking, like, what's inside, And I get up there and there's a 3.5 meter scrub python that has just annihilated her pet cat. And thankfully, I had a background in snakes, so I was able to just grab that guy and relocate him to a rainforest without any damage to the animal.
Man's got it.
But just happened to be the right car that got the job. And another one for me was, which I look back, it was such beautiful memories, is in Port Douglas. Had a job come through, 2 minutes before I finished my shift. I'm thinking, oh, what's this job? Looking at overtime already. And they said, there's a crocodile walking along the beach. I went, right? So jump in a car, drive to 4 Mile Beach, which was a very, very popular swimming area. And there's probably about a 4 meter crocodile swimming in the shallows just up and down the beach. This was breeding season. Port Douglas is centred between two major river systems, which are populated with crocodiles. This is a male just moving along the beach from one river to another. So we drove down the beach next to the crocodile with my lights and sirens on, telling everyone to get out of the water as the crocodile was swimming past. So that was a pretty interesting experience. So definitely a pinch me moment. I just thought, my God, like, how good is this?
That's a solid sized animal too. Wow. 4 meters worth of croc.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, though, we did go to a lot of search warrants where we found animal parts. One of the more popular parts was sawfish rostrums. So, a sawfish has got this beautiful big rostrum at the end of its face with the small little teeth coming out the side. Unfortunately, a lot of people would kill these animals and remove the rostrum as a collector's item. It's absolutely illegal. It's a protected animal in Australia. So we would find some of these rostrums that were being turned into weapons. Most distinctly, I remember in Cairns coming across a cricket bat handle and, a metre long, if not a little bit longer, rostrum taped to the cricket bat handle. So it was almost like a modified club weapon, which was pretty phenomenal. And thanks to Jodie's podcast, we actually got in touch with an expert that specialises in sharks and rays of Australia. And she said, when we obtained these rostrums from people, we're able to do checks on them and determine how old the animal was and the species that it was, and this can assist us with our research. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. So I actually, got in touch with the police and said, hey, can we make sure that these rostrums that we're seizing from, these drug houses or whatever are handed on to this organisation? They can use them. And
Mm.
they said, yeah, believe it or not, we're actually doing that already. And just through the contacts that I made, I remember hearing that rostrum was now part of the scientific collection. That was part of a cricket bat is now being used as an educational resource, and
Wow.
also the genetics are being used for research of the wild populations, which is pretty interesting.
Wow, and those sawfish, as far as they can get pretty big. I'm trying to remember one. The biggest one I could, I don't want to actually say it because I'm not sure. I could be wrong, but it was in excess of 16 feet, if not. It was a story of, I've seen the photo of it I think it might have been a gentleman named Rob Brettle. I think like back to pre 2000s, he caught one, but I could be wrong. Yeah, they can get, as correct me if I'm wrong, pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't know exactly how large they get, but you're looking in excess of 4 meters comfortably, which is, the 12-foot mark. So I think your 16
Mm.
foot probably isn't too far fetched. I think that's probably quite accurate.
Again, there's you would have seen so much, and it's sad to see. Do you think that legislation helps with has a big impact on the amount of illegal wildlife trade that occurs within Australian borders? We're pretty tight on it. Do you think there's some reform that needs to take place, or what are your thoughts on this space?
Yeah, look, I think I don't know the actual work that's been done by federal police. It's pretty hush hush when it comes to wildlife smuggling. Obviously a lot of intelligence based. They're trying to crack down on that
Right.
kind of space, but if people are still doing it, it means they're not being deterred enough, and there's still money to be made. I'm not afraid to say the name of Neil Simpson.
Mm.
He's one of the most well known wildlife or reptile smugglers in Australia. He's been imprisoned multiple times, but he's still doing it. So there must be a profit coming through to these people for them to continue to do it. The reward must be there
That
for the
makes sense.
risk. So I would say,
Mm.
yeah, there's absolutely still a lot of room
Mm.
where people are getting animals through the border, and the legislation is only as good as it's being policed. So potentially that space is being under resourced. I don't know, but absolutely it'd be great to see the
Yep.
amount of effort that's been put into wildlife smuggling as to other things. Every single time I see someone's being arrested for wildlife smuggling, it's a happy sad moment. It's terribly sad that these animals are being subjected to this kind of
Yeah.
disgusting behaviour, but it's also great to see that these people are being held accountable and being publicly shamed as well. That that sometimes that's the biggest penalty for some of these people. So yeah, I think it is probably a little bit under
Yeah.
resourced. And it would be great to see more of a crackdown, but I don't have a deeper understanding of that space.
Maybe something that you would have more of an experience in is your own personal kind of walk through this wildlife industry. You said you gave us a couple of pointers earlier on in the conversation of moments that you've kind of uh, uh, that you've worked with wildlife, the different industries and experiences you've had. Could you? What was your younger years like? If we can move into that a little bit, and did you grow up in a large family, a family that was like action packed, loved the wildlife? Every hole that you walked by with your siblings, their hand was going down trying to catch mud crabs. Like, what was the younger years kind of for you, wildlife and family like?
Yeah, I'm actually the youngest of three boys, so I guess that probably paints the image well enough. I was a bit of a rascal, a bit of a they probably diagnosed me with ADD if they went back in time. But yeah, just hyper energetic, crazy kid, always outdoors. Look, not a deep fascination with wildlife, I must admit. I still can say though that the first
Mm.
DVD that I ever watched in my entire life was Steve Irwin Collision Course. So that's that's a little bit of a throwback to my
Yes,
younger
yes.
years. But most certainly, I didn't have a passion for wildlife. My parents definitely pushed a passion for nature. I lived on acreage in New South Wales. My parents
Okay.
were always planting a lot of native plant species to attract birds. We had a satin bowerbird out the front. We had a tawny frogmouth every night on the clothesline. My dad had a
Awesome.
feather of a regent bowerbird, and he used to always say, "If you ever see this bird, Matt, consider yourself lucky." So, there was lots of little seeds planted in my childhood for nature, but I wouldn't say I grew up in a
Yeah.
crazy wildlife family. Just had a really healthy
Mm.
respect for the outdoors, and I thank my parents for that. But certainly not, my whole life I'm going to become
Yeah.
a zookeeper.
So, how did you feel looking back now? How do you feel having your parents kind of aware of their environment and aware of nature? How does it feel knowing that the seeds that they planted has now sprouted into you leading expeditions around Australia?
So, well, I'm one of three. My dad always said to me, he said, I was a little bit confused. I raised all you boys the same and you came out differently. And you couldn't be further from the truth. One of my brothers works in London and runs a high end IT business and works for the government in the computer space. Another one of my brothers works for a high end insurance company in Melbourne. So they're big corporate workers, and the city life. They're used to the concrete jungle, and I certainly broke the mold. I get really uncomfortable in a place like Cairns. It's only got 200 odd
Mm.
thousand people, so I feel very out of place when I'm in a place like Sydney or
Yeah,
Brisbane or Melbourne. But this is where my brothers thrive in. So even though we
yeah,
all got given the same opportunities as a kid and the same childhood, we all turned out very differently. But my dad does always say that when he was younger, he had a very big sense of adventure and he sees that in me a lot. So, you know, I'm very, very thankful for those opportunities, and obviously everything happens for a reason. The
yeah,
journey goes the way it goes for the outcome that I've got today.
yeah. And do you has your dad gone out with you on any of your tours?
It's funny you say that. When I was younger, I always said to my dad I wanted to drive across Australia with him. Um, and we always looked at the Savannah Way, Cairns to Broome, and that was always the adventure. When I joined the police, I was,
Mm.
I got a pretty decent income, so I was fortunate enough to buy a four-wheel drive, and I said to my dad, "Right, let's do it." So I chucked my dad in the car, and we spent 2 weeks driving from Cairns to Broome, so the east coast to the west coast. When I got to Broome, I kicked him out, and then had two mates jump in for the return trip. But afterwards, my mum said, "Oh, your dad went on a trip with you. I would love to go on an adventure with you." So I said, "Oh, righto, Mum, for your 60th birthday, I'll take you on a holiday. How's that sound?" She's like, "Oh, that'd be great." So I took her to the Komodo Islands, and I held a spitting cobra with her
Yes,
for her 60th birthday. So that was pretty special and something that she said was very enjoyable, but very won't need to do it again,
coolest kid ever.
maybe. And then my dad said, "Oh, you took your mum on an adventure overseas. What do you got for me?" And I said, "Oh, look, I'm planning a trip. It's a couple of boys are going. You're happy to come, but I'm not telling you where we're going." He says, "Oh, righto." So I took my dad, my cousin, and a friend to the Ecuadorian Amazon, and we camped for 2 weeks in the rainforest. So that was camping in with locals in the villages,
Wow.
a very, very real experience. And I took my dad along for that, and again he said that was great, but I think I don't think I need to do that again. So I have taken my parents on experiences. Um,
Oh man.
my Actually, just as recent as last year, my mum has always said that one of her bucket list items, your parents are getting old. They want to achieve these things before their time's up. My mum always wanted to go to Egypt and see the tomb of
Mm.
Tutankhamun. And my dad said there is absolutely no way in the world he's going to Egypt. So I went over with my mum just last year to Egypt, and I managed to get her into the Valley of the Kings to see the tomb of
Wow.
Tutankhamun. So yeah, I've been on a few adventures with my parents, and
So cool.
it's a time that I'll probably look back on. Unfortunately, the day will come when my parents are passed, and I'll look back on these moments
Mm.
and really appreciate the fact that I could have a relationship with my parents. I think that's really important for any person to do. If you're in the space to be able to do that emotionally, is to be able to spend time with your parents as
Yes.
friends and form those connections and learn a little bit more about
Mm.
them and how they became the way they are today.
Wow. And I'm surprised to hear that your dad saying that he didn't want to go to Egypt. I mean, I thought any opportunity to go overseas would be great. But it's great that your mum went either way, and some have some great adventures to go across Australia. The day that will come when I do that. I'm looking forward to that. And so those were that kind of stemmed from your younger years. That we got from that is that your dad and your parents kind of instilled this general appreciation for wildlife across you and your brothers, but then you've kind of stuck to the natural jungle, and your brothers have stuck to the cement jungle or the unnatural jungle. Maybe what are some maybe we'll go to the three again. Is there 1 to 3 moments that you can look back on and think that in that moment it didn't mean much to you, but seeing where you are now, the decision you made back then was quite prominent?
Mm, that's a really good one. Um, every decision I've made, good or bad, is has shaped the journey that I've been on. And the place that I'm at the moment with my career is all my dreams have come true. There's no doubt about it, and I'll continue to be in this space for a long time. Moments that I look back
Well,
on,
that's something to say.
um, moments that I look back on as pivotal moments was probably forming some of the connections that I had at the Australian Reptile Park when I was a youngster. Um, when I first started volunteering there was a guy working casually who was 19 years old. His name's Bill, and Bill and I got along pretty well. We used to have a lot of fun and muck around, and I learned a lot from Bill. Bill is now the general manager of the Australian Reptile Park, and we maintain that relationship. And we had a lot of great times when I was younger, but as we got older, I see him as a role model. And he's been a great mentor for me. And, I wouldn't necessarily say he's been a guide in my journey, but he's always been someone that's achieving greatness and inspires me to also, reach for the stars. So forming relationships like that when I was
Yeah.
younger, which was, I was a young fella, I was mostly going out, have beers and party. But these friends that I got along the way turned out to be really inspiring characters moving forward. Um, Also, the photography competition where I had that Cassery photo, that was definitely a moment that I just thought, it's run of the mill,
Yes.
cool. I've won. Let's get my certificate. Let's get out of here. I'm a little bit embarrassed, but that turned out to harvest one of the greatest relationships that I have with James, and I would call him one of my best friends. We've had some amazing times together, and he has certainly nurtured my career into the tour guiding space.
For sure.
And one of the challenging things for James was I was working for him full time, had done for a number of years, leading multi-day tours for him, doing a lot of work with him. And Natural Habitat Adventures essentially approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to come and work for us instead?" And that was a tough one because I owe my loyalty to James and what he had given me. So
Mm.
I brought up the conversation, said, "Look, this is what the opportunity is. I would love to take it, but I also appreciate the opportunities that you've given me and want to maintain that." And he said, "If you don't do that, you're an idiot. Like, go get it. What are you waiting for?" So he really encouraged me and put the boot up me to
Yeah, that's the
make
kind
sure
of friend you want.
to make sure I had the opportunity to grab my goals. So it was a loss to him, but he certainly wasn't going to let that affect, his relationship with me. He wanted to make sure that I achieved what I could, and I still work with him. I do multi-day tours for James now, bird watching and photography tours, and also I think one of the other pinnacle moments was a very interesting story. A gentleman actually reached out to Jody, my wife, Zutiyu, and said he was French. Well, he still is French, I'm guessing. And he reached out and said, "Look, I'm coming to far north Queensland, and and I want to go on a tour." And my wife said, "Oh, we're an education business. We don't run tours." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I know. I want to go on a tour." And she says, "Oh, I don't think you understand. We don't do tours." And he says, "Yeah, I know you don't do tours, but I want you to take me out on a tour." And I just thought, geez, this is weird. So his name was Clement, and I'll never forget him. He's one of the greatest men I've ever met. And he said, "Look, I'm coming over. I want to go on a tour." And I just said, "Bugger it, I'm going to take him out." So this random French guy has arrived in far north Queensland, never met the guy, have no idea about him, and I've chucked him in my car and said, "Let's go find some animals." And we spent 2 days just traveling around far north Queensland looking at wildlife. And it turns out that he was actually a life coach. And I just essentially got therapy for like 2 days. And he said to me, "Look, you're a police officer.
Wow.
Um, I think you really, I don't think your passion's there. I think you need to move into tour guiding, and I think that is where your purpose in life lives. You need to make sure that you do what you want to do, not what you feel like you have to do." And those conversations over those 2 days led to me
Mm.
becoming a tour guide, and eventually moving full time into expedition leading around Australia.
Wow.
If it wasn't for that moment, I don't know if I would have been on this journey today. So, a random moment eating pizza and looking at
Yeah.
cassowaries with a French guy named Clement turned out to be one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had.
Wow, and that is an amazing story. Clement, a random French guy reaching out, seeing that you don't do tours, but insists 3 times to your wife that you need to do that you want to that he wants you guys to take him out on a tour. That's brilliant. You also said I don't know where at what point it was, but your wife. You said you worked with your now wife. Was there on the job that you met Jody?
Yes, absolutely. I met Jodie many years ago at a wildlife conference in Cairns a long time ago. I met her then just in the industry because I knew who she was and whatnot, and nothing to it. And then actually, I started working with Jodie, and I won't go into details, obviously, but a work relationship turned into a real life relationship, and now we're married. It's hard to find someone in the world
Flourished.
that has an appreciation for the same things in life, but also knows when to call you out and also lay the boot up your bum if you need it. She's an incredibly big motivator for me.
Yeah.
She's a really big role model for me, and she just says it how it is. She doesn't tell me what I want to hear. She tells me what I need to hear, which is something I really appreciate.
Yeah, and I think having that across life, even with friends, having friends that will call you out, having people in your life that will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Which, potentially that could even move into a controversial topic where I think there's a lot of socially, there's a lot of tell me what I want to hear, not tell me what I need to hear, sort of approach to life, which I think is affecting thing more than just the simple day-to-day life. It's affecting greater things as well. Matt, I'd like to get into a little bit of your the organization. I believe is the right terminology. The organization that you created, Croc. Which I wrote this down. I want to get this correct. The community representation of crocodiles, and that's a big deal, obviously, to be able to create an organization and see that there's a need there. Because I thought there was a lot of organizations, but you obviously thought there was not enough, and more was needed for the crocodiles. So I'd like to get into that, but just finishing up on your story, is there anything that you would suggest outside of making connections from the lines of work that you've been in, for people to be able to do what you do? Is there anything outside of the key making connections and communicating with people? Is there a skill you think that should be harnessed to be able to do what you do?
I think good organisation skills. I think that's imperative if you're running multi-day tours. I have an amazing book, actually. It's called the Professional Guide's Handbook. And as you can imagine, it's quite a niche, but it's a book it's very thick. Okay. It's like this, designed purely for running high-end multi-logistical tours around Australia. If people wanted to get into that kind of work, I think it's best to understand what it is. Everyone thinks that guiding, you just need to know everything and you need to tell people stuff. That's not it at all. You need to balance out personalities in groups. You need to organize group dynamics. You need to be very observant of people and their behavior and pick up on cues. And you also have to be, incredibly organized. I'll be the first to admit I am so unorganized when it comes to my daily life. But I think that's because I'm so organized when it comes to my professional life. But making sure that you are constantly dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and being incredibly observant, and very firm in your approach to how things run. Making sure that the game doesn't get away from you. Make sure you're in control of what's ahead. Every great leader. It doesn't matter whether you're in nature guide or running a boot camp. It's the ability to control and move in the right direction. And I think that's really important to leading multi-day tours around Australia. It's having that good control, good communication, and all while storytelling and representing the natural world. So there's a lot to do. Knowing everything is about 5% of your job. 95% of it is logistics and people management.
Okay. Well, 5% is knowing everything. 95% is logistics. That's a big deal. I think logistically and organizationally, there's two C's in the organization world that I love, and that is calendars and cupboards. I think calendars and cupboards can change your life, and if you add those to your life, then life will be good. The two C's, calendars and cupboards.
Something I want to jump in on there.
C,
I just want to add one last thing. If anyone wants to be a tour guide or work with wildlife or in any industry, I think it's really important to get very, very good at saying, I don't know. The power of saying, I don't know is so underrated. If you try to make something up when you're talking or communicating with someone or running a tour or anything, you can get called out very quickly, and your integrity is absolutely gone. You're never going to get that back. Saying, I don't know is probably my favorite sentence. I say it almost every tour. I don't know. Hey, Matt, what's this plant that we've just come across in Cradle Mountain Valley? I don't know. But I've got a wildflowers book at the room. How about over lunch we get that out and have a look together? Saying I don't know is saying I'm a human, I'm a real human, and I'm comfortable in my knowledge space. And I think that's really important for people to know, is don't fake it till you make it. Just be yourself, be confident, and always admit when, number one, you're wrong, or number two, that you don't know something.
Wow, that's glad you jumped in on that. That's a great point that you make. Saying I don't know, I think that's been something personally I've had to. I'm still somewhat working on, but I realized this through people in my life that have been looking out for me. It's okay to say I don't know, and I think it's good and beneficial that you also make that point as well. Someone who is seen as an expert in this field. That's a great point that you make. So thank you for that. But moving into the other C that you created, the CROC organization. Could you please just expand upon that a little bit, and then afterwards we'll jump into the overrated underrated game, which will be great fun. I'd love to see what you say to these questions. But with CROC, why did you see that there was? Why did you think there was a space that was void and needed some extra help? And why did you think that you could do it and opposed to someone else?
Interesting story. Let's go back about 12 years ago now, 2013. There was a crocodile. Well, he's been removed since, but there's a crocodile in an area called the Mowbray River, which is between Cairns and Port Douglas. Very, very popular spot. People can, see the crocodile sitting on the mud bank. Unfortunately, in 2013, the government that came in during that election, and I don't dive into political topics, so I'll briefly work my way through this, said that they were going to proactively remove crocodiles from the far north Queensland area. And I had some contacts in the media world from doing, news reports through the zoos and things like that. And one of those media reporters said, "Hey, Matt, the politician is making an announcement at the Barron River boat ramp in Cairns that they're going to proactively remove crocodiles. I just wanted to let you know that." And I said, "Okay." I'm 23 years old, right? And I said, "Yep, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to pretend to be a journalist. Okay. I'm going to ask him some really hard-hitting questions about crocodile management that he won't have a clue about. And it's going to be captured on the TV, and we're going to show the incompetence of these members that are making the decisions. That was my idea as a 23-year-old, right? So I put my big boy pants on.
Okay, very bold, very bold.
I went down there, and I said to him, there was the interview and all the catchphrases that politicians throw around, and I said to him, in your management plan it says that an animal will be humanely euthanized. Can you please entail, how that process goes about? And he says, I'm not too sure. That's up to the rangers. And I said, okay, so you're making decisions that you're ill informed about, are you? I said, wouldn't it be in the politician's best interest to make sure that he knows the policy inside and out before he jumps on the TV and starts spruiking about it? Anyway, needless to say, that politician got quite upset about it. He had a tantrum and stormed off, and it was all captured on TV. So believe it or not, the Sunrise program actually screened it and got me on a live-to-air interview. And I thought, right, I'm 23 years old. I'm going on Sunrise. I need to say everything I can about how bad it is to remove crocodiles. And I thought, well, Sunrise are probably going to cut me off if I draw a breath. So I'm going to say as much as I possibly can without needing to breathe. So when I got on there, I spent about 2.5 minutes just talking about how flawed the policy was. And as soon as I took a breath, they're like, all righty, we're going to move on to our next segment now. So I knew it was going to happen. I went hard, and it was pretty cool.
You were right.
At that point, I decided I wanted to stand up against the government. I formed a group, and I was thankful enough to do some public presentations. I volunteered to do crocodile education in schools and just took a gold coin donation. That gold coin donation went into designing and creating crocodile safety pamphlets that I handed out at each show. So do the show, make a couple of bucks, and give kids a brochure to take home and show mum and dad about how to be croc-wise and a little bit about crocodile behaviour. With that, I ended up travelling around Australia to certain places, and I was fortunate enough to meet Bob Irwin, which is Steve Irwin's father, and I ended up doing a fair bit of work with him moving forward.
Yeah, wow.
He flew me down to Brisbane to do a talk at the Ipswich Reptile Expo back in the day. And, I spoke in front of a bunch of high-end wildlife advocates.
Around in here.
Yeah, and I spoke at the formal dinner. I was actually the opening speech that night, and I essentially said, look, we need to start respecting these animals. Just because they're feared in our community doesn't mean they're not worthy of respect. So I sort of dived down that line. And then a couple of years later, I joined the police, and I realised it was probably a conflict of, tackling politicians on TV, metaphorically, of course, into policing is going to be a bit of an issue working with the government. So I stopped doing that advocacy work. But since leaving the police, I've always had a passion and probably a little bit of regret of stopping, standing up for these animals. So a couple of years ago now, probably 18 months ago, there was a gentleman in far north Queensland that filmed himself walking down a boat ramp in very, very populated crocodile habitat. And he essentially was with his dog, walked into the river, past crocodile warning signs, locals telling him not to, filmed himself going into the water, and, a 4-meter crocodile jumped out, bit the guy on the leg, spat him out, grabbed the dog and ate it. And this happens. People do stupid things, and the crocodile was shot as a result of that. But this was a really pivotal moment. This had been recorded. Right. We have evidence that this guy was an idiot. It's not a story that, I was down at the edge of the water fishing and a croc jumped out, chased me and bit me and ate my dog. This is evidence that has shown us that this man walked into the water, like completely reckless. His behaviour constitutes serious animal cruelty. So when that happened, I thought, geez, man, we're going to have to stand up here. So I contacted a couple of friends of mine, including Amanda French, who is, Bob Irwin's personal assistant, author of his biography, and a couple of others, including Mick Bender, in fact. And we decided that we were going to create an organisation where we would stand up and have a crack at the politicians and say, hey, this is not a crocodile management problem. This is a human management problem. And we need to start focusing our attention on people behaviour, not crocodiles. So we created the organisation CROC, Community Representation of Crocodiles. It's very, very hard to come up with a name that spelt croc. But I thought it was really important to make sure that it was easy to...
I think you've done a great job.
Yeah. So we have plenty of names floating around, but
I think that's brilliant.
As soon as we hit CROC, Community Representation of Crocodiles, I thought, that spells it out. It's easy to do. Let's rock and roll. We did a lot of work over that, a lot of campaigning with the government. just last year, I had a meeting with Amanda and Mick and Bob Irwin, actually, and the Environmental Minister of Queensland, where, this is the Labor government, where they agreed to increase legislation whereby it would make it illegal to undertake reckless activities in crocodile habitat. It was great. The Environmental Minister agreed on all our proposals. We were represented by the Environmental Defender's Office, which was fantastic support from a legal point of view. We drafted a legislation reform and said these things need to be made illegal, including unintentionally feeding a crocodile, which is, leaving fish scraps at a boat ramp, which lures crocodiles. We need to make it illegal to jump into crocodile habitat and film it for social media, because what's happening is these crocodiles are modifying their behavior. And when they do that and start going towards food or people, the government is shooting them. So he said, right, we need to stop. We can't manage crocodile behavior. They're a wild animal. They've been around for, over 200 million years. And we need to start focusing on the people behavior. So we drafted that legislation, put it towards the environmental minister.
Okay.
She agreed upon it. The next day, they had a full portfolio shuffle of all the ministers, and the environmental minister went into housing. So our meeting essentially was just null and void, which was really, really heartbreaking.
Removed completely.
Bob took it very, very personally, because he saw this as almost like a last hurrah of a campaign that he could have and be involved in. He was very upset about it, but we didn't give up. We continued to campaign with the new environmental minister, and thankfully, due to the great work, and I take my hat off more so to the Environmental Defender's Office. They deserve all the recognition for this, but the government ended up changing legislation and amending it to some of our suggestions. And unfortunately, this did occur after a fatal crocodile incident in an area called Cooktown, where a man has essentially fallen into the water, where a crocodile was waiting for him. The crocodile was waiting for him because people would regularly throw fish scraps to this animal and lure it to the area. So it's proven that the human behavior has led to this fatality. So all of a sudden, this meeting we had a year earlier, if this was put in place, that death may have been prevented. We said that this is what's going to happen if you don't change the legislation. So when the death did happen, the government says, right, panic stations, we need to do something. And they took on some of our suggestions, including making it illegal to unintentionally or bait a crocodile. So that was very, very rewarding. We've done a lot of work. We've campaigned to fundraise for a reward for the death of a crocodile. So someone actually killed 2 crocodiles in the Daintree and actually left one of the corpses.
Was this recently last year?
Yeah, last year. And a very, very well-known crocodile in the Daintree River. It was actually the corpse was left next to a tour operator's boat that was obviously very, very upset about the situation. So we actually raised money and raised $10,000 reward.
Targeted.
Yeah. So with that $10,000 reward, we passed it over to Crime Stoppers Queensland, and subsequently, that's actually the biggest financial reward for any wildlife-related offence in Australia. And we put that forward and tried to assist the investigators where we could by including, a financial incentive and put more pressure on people that may know who has committed these offences. Now, unfortunately, it didn't lead to a prosecution, but what it did was it showed people in the public that, well, these animals are important, and CROC, the organisation, will step up and have a crack, and we will support investigators where we can to ensure that, prosecutions are commenced where we can help out as best as possible. My favourite part of that was actually the local newspaper. And I see this as a life achievement, even though they were taking the absolute mickey out of me. But they made a caricature out of me. In the newspaper, you get the artist makes those satirical pieces, and it was me, clearly me. It had a beard and a blonde hair, driving a boat down the river. It said "Croc" on the side of the boat, and I was holding up a financial reward. So that was pretty funny. I thought that was really good. And again, they're trying to take the mickey out of me, but I took that as the ultimate compliment. Yeah, I thought it was great.
Yeah, that's a compliment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
again, that's a compliment. That's not the Mickey being gone. With the crocodile, you said the crocodile had to be shot. And before the conversation, this recorded conversation, you mentioned as well um, that crocodiles have to be euthanized and not relocated. Can you please just give us an explanation of why they have to be euthanized and they can't be relocated?
Well, firstly, the politicians are very careful of their wording, of course. Generally the policies will say the crocodile
Mm,
is removed. When you slide down that the bottom of that policy, it's got the definition section. Removed includes, euthanasia, all these other things. So they say, yeah, the crocodile is removed from the environment, but
okay,
under their own legislation, the word removed can mean a bullet in the head. The crocodile may be put in a farm,
interesting. Hmm.
but generally speaking, most crocodile farms are full. They don't want more aggressive males. So even if it is dropped off at a farm, they'll put a bullet in it in sometimes. So a lot of these crocodiles are being killed. The reason we can't relocate wild crocodiles actually stems from a study from Steve Irwin. Obviously, before his tragic passing, I think it was in the early 2000s, he did a project where
Yes.
he captured 4 crocodiles and relocated them to different areas with GPS trackers on them. And some of the crocodiles he moved from the east coast of Cape York Peninsula to the west, so into the Gulf country of Queensland. And he monitored their movements. And the crocodiles came straight back to where they were removed from. And that's mind blowing because it's
Right.
shown that these animals have some form of honing mechanism where they can return to the place in which they were removed. And unfortunately, obviously, due to his passing, that research was not continued, or some form of other alternative approach wasn't
Mm,
identified. Just that scientific paper has been used to say they can't be relocated, and I can appreciate that. Crocodile removals, they do lead to a false sense of security. If you promote the fact that a crocodile has been removed from a river system, it is human behavior that they will think that river system is safe, when realistically it creates an environmental vacuum. Other
yes.
crocodiles will come into the area. They're an ambush
Hmm.
predator at times.
Then
They're
move in.
stealthy.
Yep.
You won't know the crocodile's there until it's too late. So removal's not always the answer. And I'll be the first to admit that, yeah, absolutely, crocodiles do need to be removed at times in certain circumstances. But this mass
Mhm.
removal and almost a proactive removal is absolutely diabolical, and not only will lead to more fatalities, but lead to environmental upset by removing an apex predator.
Wow. And to be honest, I didn't think about up until recently that by removing a crocodile, you're making a vacuum. And the nature loves a vacuum is a phrase I hear, and I think this is a good example of that being implemented. That then other crocodiles, adolescent males, if it's a dominant male that's removed by either the governmental removing method or actually being removed locationally alive still, that creates a space for other crocodiles to come in. And I think also heard some comments on with adolescent crocodiles, because they're coming into a new environment, could be maybe a bit more aggressive and more uh, oh, forceful in their movings and into their interaction with their new environment, because they're trying to assert dominance.
Yeah,
Is
they're trying
also
to
a
they're
thing
trying to
to
show that,
consider.
hey,
Um,
I am this crocodile. I am trying to find my place, and aggression is the key when it comes to young males
mm,
finding their place in the hierarchy.
yeah, yeah, and which is, again, it's an interesting thing, another dynamic to consider when working with crocodiles. Matt, we'll as this conversation, like a croc sliding into water, this conversation kind of finishing up a little bit. Where might people be able to reach out to you about and learn more about this croc organization that you have?
So at the moment, we're currently revamping our website, actually. So generally, I would say, jump on our website and check it out. But you can see Croc on Facebook or Instagram, and we do have an email as well, which is info@crocqueensland or qld.com.au. But yeah, if you jump on any of our social media pages, reach out. We do have an amazing team now of great conservationists, educators, and advocates. And obviously, we're more than willing to have a chat. Or you can reach out to me personally as well. I'm always down for a good yarn.
Amazing. And I will put these details as well down in the show notes so that people can find this a lot easier. But I was thinking, because I know you got a dip soon. Do you have enough time to go through this overrated, underrated
Absolutely.
question segment of the show?
Let's do it.
Fabulous. Okay. Overrated, underrated. Artificial wildlife habitats. So coral reef restoration or something akin to that.
Underrated.
Underrated. Why might that be underrated? Is there not enough happening in that space right now?
Yeah, I certainly think when it comes to governmental funding, not enough money's been put into that, not enough resources, but also smarter use of the money as well. I see, the Cairns Aquarium and the Great Barrier Reef Coral Bank and the great work they're doing, and I think it's not getting, number one, enough publicity or enough funding. And I think there's some great work to be done there. And I've firsthand seen a lot of damage to the reef in far north Queensland. So absolutely underrated. I love the work that they do.
Yeah, been up there for so long. Amazing. Actually, talking about reefs, I only just remembered this now. There's actually gone a bit of a dark side of death. Crematoriums. There's a couple, at least. There's a couple companies that actually create once they've ashed the person down, they actually create somewhat of a coral structure for coral to attach to, and they place it out in the ocean. And so then the organic matter that is from the people that was a person then gets used and reused by the corals, which is an interesting technique of crematation, but it's a natural crematation, so that's interesting. Next, overrated, underrated, wildlife photography as a conservation tool.
Very much underrated, I would say. There is obviously a lot of awareness out there, but you can make someone fall in. You can't make anyone do anything really, but certainly photography allows people to
strongly
experience something that they may not be able to experience. Physically or financially, and you can convey so many different messages through photography. Speaking to a nature photographer, that's my passion. So I think everything relating to wildlife photography is absolutely underrated, and we should be investing more time and effort into it. Absolutely, it gives people a window into the life of a wild animal.
Confident. I was feeling confident with your answer on that one. Next question, overrated, underrated, Matt. Present day wildlife legislation in comparison to 50 years ago.
Present day wildlife legislation compared to 50 years ago. I'm going to say underrated again. I have seen a lot of change over the last 50 years, but we've still got a lot more to go. And legislation change is one thing, but if you're not going to police it, it's a completely pointless piece of paper that's lodged on the internet. So I think underrated in the fact that there is definitely more work that needs to be done, but also a lot more resources put into actually policing that legislation.
Awesome. Next question, overrated, underrated, wildlife crime units within law enforcement agencies.
Very, very, very underrated. Again, I worked for the Queensland Police where a lot of
three varies.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a lot of officers that didn't even know the Nature Conservation Act. I mean, there's so many pieces of legislation that police have to be familiar with, but I don't think there's a big focus on it at all. There is no internal teachings on the Nature Conservation Act for general duties police officers. So I think there needs to be a more awareness around that space, and absolutely more effort put into educating our law enforcement police for nature offences, of course.
Awesome. It makes sense. I was feeling what you were going to say, but it's good to say. Good to know. I wasn't wrong. This is the final question, Matt. Of overrated, underrated. It's the effectiveness of penalties for illegal poaching.
Very underrated. Otherwise, we wouldn't see repeat offenders. It's as simple as that. To determine how good of a deterrent something is, you have to see how often people offend and reoffend. The reoffending rate in Australia is very high, particularly for certain people who have been prosecuted and imprisoned. But, a penalty is only helpful if these people are being rehabilitated as well. Prisons are designed for rehabilitation, not for penalty. Punishment is segregation from society, but there needs to be some form of rehabilitation in there. maybe that's the well and truly underrated element of it, is the rehabilitation component.
Okay, and that's another perspective to consider. I hadn't thought about the rehabilitation side of things. And uh, is there one way that we could, is it more of a societal thing? Is it a team method? Is it a governmental method? What method do you think would be most, as kind of like a final query? What method do you think would be most successful in regards to rehabilitation in this space?
I'm going to use my ace card here and say I don't know. I really don't know. I could probably sit on that question for the next week, sitting here drinking coffee in my rainforest, looking at tree kangaroos, thinking about the same question. I wouldn't have an answer. I do not know, and I'm not afraid to admit it.
Yeah, you know what, and that's a good way to finish up on the conversation with your ace card of I don't know. Remembering to say, if you don't know, it's okay to admit and say, I don't know. Well, Matt, I know you got to run, man. Super appreciative of your time, and thank you for sharing your story and what life looks like through your eyes. It's been a pretty fascinating conversation, and thank you for all you've had to say.
I appreciate it, mate. Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to find more information on today's guest or more information on the podcast, you can find those details in the description below. Otherwise, I hope and look forward to seeing you in the next one.